Hi there, and welcome to episode 72 of the Analyst Brief podcast, brought to you by the Cyber Hut. My name is Simon Moffatt, founder and research analyst at the Cyber Hut, and with me as ever is co-host Mr. David Mahdi. Dave, how are we doing?
Hello, I'm fantastic. How are you, Simon?
I am perfectly well, very well. It feels like summer actually in Team UK. I was actually I was away travelling last week and arrived back in UK. Blue skies, sitting outside. It's pretty unusual actually, to be honest. But no, it's things are very good in the hood and very good in the whole identity and identity security world. How are you doing? You well? You been busy?
No, been busy. It's been kind of nice. As we've discussed in other episodes, just had long travels of tons of events. So, from FSISAC to Gartner IAM to RSA, I think I'm missing something, but it was just constant travel, losing several weekends. But it's been nice to just be grounded and, just ramping up before we get into a couple more events before the summer, like Identiverse, Gartner Security and Risk. And I think there's a few things in between there. But I saw on the socials, you were away somewhere, right? Where were you?
I was traveling. First time to Sao Paulo for me last week.
So your first time? Okay, excellent.
First time, It was first time there. It was always part of my whatever bucket list or whatever you call it these days to give that a go. And it being in the offing a few years back and exchange, but there's let me share this. But I was at a conference called the IAM Tech Day, which is absolutely fabulous identity focused set of events and communities, really. Been set up by a guy called Alfredo Santos several years ago, and he's built out a wonderful online, virtual, and obviously now we've sort of got over COVID the last sort of 4 or 5 years, and we're sort of back in the physical conference season. But since then, they're basically building out a huge community down in Latin America, in Brazil. And there's a 2-day IAM Tech Day based down in Sao Paulo, which is a huge event. I was one of the best identity events I have been to, and I have been to a few. It has to be said, I've been to a few events.
Have. That's
over the years, one or two. And it's as we know, there's a lot of conferences out there, and there's a lot of those hybrid conferences where maybe you get a bit of risk and then identities sort of tagged in there, or even if you go to RSA, which is a cybersecurity event, identity has a huge part to play. But as we know at RSA, you could spend 80% of your time doing endpoints, doing whatever, mobile security, data security. There's a whole host of things there. And yes, there are 1 or 2 identity-specific smaller events. And yes, we mentioned Identiverse there at the top, and there's a couple of others there. But this to me was one of the biggest identity events I have been to. Now, I've been to a few. I think the numbers...
Wow.
I'm not breaching anything here, but I think the public numbers were something like 2,700 attendees over the 2-day event. And there were obviously a mixture of sort of analysts and practitioners, consultants, identity solution people, as well as vendors and stuff. But it was a thoroughly fascinating conference. And I was, luckily enough, I was invited to present on day 1 of the conference, like you do. And I basically just give a quick sort of breakdown around where things may be heading to for the next 5 or 6 years. A lot of things we talk about here on the podcast around NHI, ITDR, fraud, threat detection response, Agentic AI, obviously in there as well. So it was a thoroughly fascinating couple of days. And the thing for me that really stood out, I guess, was absolutely, yes, you get the vendor pitches, and there's some wonderful, interesting new startups from the Brazil region in there as well. I'm doing a big write-up this week, probably before this gets pushed out as a podcast, but there'll be a full write-up, as always, on the Radar newsletter there. But I think the really interesting thing was, as always, the case studies and all of the actual implementation detail that we love, I guess, in the identity space around how to deploy B2C identity, how you look at B2C and B2E converge, how you measure your identity project, and how you make sure you're sort of communicating up the food chain and making sure the C-level understands authentication, authorization, all of the lower level identity aspects, and how you look at the thinking about AI, which we've obviously know is a big deal. So yeah, lots and lots and lots of talks there, lots of
Yeah.
material which I think they'll be releasing and putting online. So
I mean,
thoroughly,
I was just gonna say, like, as you're scrolling, it's good to see some, mix of like tech providers alongside on stage, I'm assuming, with some practitioners there as well, and unpacking those projects. I mean, absolutely. I think even when I reflect back on all the events that you and I go to, those are some of the more impactful ones when there's a practitioner on stage with a technology provider usually, and they can both talk about how we arrived at the use case and the KPIs and how we were successful. Those are always the best ones.
100%. And I think at one or two of the sessions, you actually had one or two customers from the same vendor as well, which is quite interesting because, as we know, not every identity project is the same. But there was definitely some real value from having the integrators contribute in here as well, both from the sort of big guys right the way down to sort of specialist, localized delivery partners. And identity is hard, as we know, and it isn't just about picking the right vendor and whatever, picking some features. It's about getting that technology embedded into the business, and whether that's financial services, banking, retail banking, we know about that from a regulatory standpoint. But there was a case study there about Embraer, who's the airline manufacturer. Now they make a whole host of different airline components, sort of short haul, long haul, military stuff. So like that is quite a complex, difficult world. And obviously they've got a bit of B2C, they've got partner, they've got supply chain. Obviously they want to be securing their staff to do that stuff. So it's just really good to see, yes, vendor stuff and what's happening in the vendor landscape, but really listening to the SIs and the practitioners around, do you know what? It isn't just the features. It's about integration, measuring success. Often the boring things as well around like migrations. We're often quite good as technologists. We talk about the future. We talk, this agentic AI or whatever feature is coming out this month. It's great. Let's talk about that. But obviously, if you're a large enterprise, several 100,000 staff or whatever, it could take you a long time before you start absorbing new features. You've got to migrate. You've got to consolidate. You've got to authentication is still one which is, there's so much value to be had around, okay, well, how did you consolidate your MFAs? How did you roll out passkeys? How did you work on the sort of nudging angle, and how did you get people to sign up to something? Or if something went wrong with the rollout process, how did you deal with those sorts of detail? I think to me that was very high up on a lot of the content here. A lot of really pragmatic, detailed, specific look at identity and how it works, how it's not, how you can start to get value out of all the cool things that we talk about, like fraud and passkeys and all the stuff which we sort of maybe take for granted. It's easy to put on a whiteboard and say, well, you need a bit of ITDR, a bit of this, a bit of that, and it's like, well, that's great, but how do we get there? And it's really good. Excellent couple of days. Jet lag's not too bad, but I'm sure it'll be a lot better after a few days of decent sleep. But thoroughly recommend that event. And the Cyberhut will do a write up this week on. I think I took about 22 pages of notes. And
wow!
Again, I've been around identity a while, so I don't always take notes at some events. It has to be said. It's a lot of things are quite easy to recall, but a lot of really interesting stuff. I will be writing up this week, and hopefully
that's excellent.
To the
that's excellent.
So very, very good, very good event. So really a big congratulations to Alfredo and the guys there for putting on a seamless event. Really, so many people, so many interesting things. There was a couple of Brazil shirts that got raffled as well in the exhibit hall as part of the happy hour. I unfortunately didn't get one of those, but the big final takeaway, just to wrap this up, it's the World Cup this year, the soccer World Cup, or the football World Cup, as we like to say, this side of the pond. And so obviously my interesting survey of Uber drivers and people and anybody who could stop and chat for 5 minutes was, are Brazil going to win the World Cup? And to be honest,
of course.
I probably asked this question about 8 times, I think, over a couple of days. the general consensus was no. That was the TLDR, was the confidence in Brazilian football this time round was a little bit lower than perhaps it has been over the classic Brazil sides of the past. Maybe I should do a separate podcast and bore everybody about the World Cup statistics and stuff I can recall. But yes, the Brazilian football team not in the greatest shape, I don't think. But yeah, thoroughly good event, and definitely one to look out for if you are in that region going forward.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, you never know with sport, right? It's so dynamic that anything can happen, even though statistics are statistics. But there's always, black swan events and things that can happen that might work in their favor. So we'll see.
As always, and well, hopefully that black swan could be England, maybe doing something this year. I will always be positive until we are knocked out. So my positivity now is very high, and it will be high until
that's good.
July.
That's a great attitude.
Until July,
that's a great attitude.
When it ends. All right. Yeah. Speaking of vulnerabilities, as England's football team potentially could be.
Ouch.
There's a lot of interesting talk about something called Mythos, Claude Mythos, and Project Glasswing. A couple of interesting terms that have been bandied around, really, probably since the start of April, I suppose. And let me share this one as well. So this is something which emerged, as I say, probably about 3 weeks ago, I suppose, which in honesty seems like an absolute age in the technology space or in the AI-led space. So Claude, one of the big sort of language labs, they released this thing called Mythos, a language model, accidentally, in the sense it was accidentally very good at cyber vulnerability identification and exploitation of that. So as always, all the lab models are all constantly iterating amongst themselves, delivering new capabilities, delivering new improvements to what they have. And it just so happened after the testing of Mythos that it was very good at essentially finding vulnerabilities in open source projects that were going back decades and decades and decades, and then in turn writing an exploit against that. Now, existing language models from all of the providers, really, ChatGPT as well, they've all been very good or have been used in the context of, let's go and scan some software, identify some vulnerabilities and whatever, maybe create a report or some sort of thing there, and or maybe try and exploit what was found. It just so happens that Mythos can do this a damn sight better than any other language model that Claude had put out previously. So what does this really mean? So we did a bit of a deep dive in this about 2 weeks ago, and that in itself seems like a long time ago, because things have moved on. There's been a lot of commentary there, and I guess the quick highlight, and I'll pull you in here, Dave, for your comment, was Mythos' language model very good at finding vulnerabilities, so it isn't being made publicly available for obvious reasons. Yes, good guys want to use that to identify their own issues and own risk, but clearly the bad guys, they're going to be able to use this as well. So it isn't publicly available. What is sort of part of their controlled ecosystem is something called Project Glasswing, which there's about 40 vendors who've been either handpicked or certainly just as part of a selective ecosystem who have been given access to this Mythos language model, essentially to use as part of their own vulnerability analysis and in turn their own clients. So a lot of the people in this list are software vendors, a lot of the big guys building out software. So obviously they're going to look at their own software, what's wrong with that, and in turn hopefully help their downstream clients. And it seems to have caused a huge storm in the sense of, if you are going to point this at anything, it's going to find some bad stuff. So suddenly is this vulnerability management, that's suddenly become a bit of a commodity. But I want to pull you in here, Dave. To me, it seems like it's all very well and good identifying the vulnerabilities, but it does seem to me that the triage of that, remediation, responding, patching, fixing, that to me suddenly it seems like it becomes the problem, does it not? Because it's going to be overwhelmed. There's a bottleneck. Can that be automated? I don't know. There's been a lot of talk of Mythos and similar changing the world of cyber. What's What's your immediate take on this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I think Simon, really good job on the post on the Cyber Hut that you've got pulled up. So just to our audience, please, if you haven't seen it, go through it. I think you did a good job of like breaking it down. But I'll just start here. I mean, look, everyone and everything has vulnerabilities and always will have vulnerabilities. It's impossible to say that anything a human, my desk I'm sitting at, everything has weak points. Everything has known vulnerabilities and also unknown. Now, when we get into the world of, code and software, obviously in today's day and age, things have more of an ecosystem, kind of state of dependencies. Actually, it was in last year, the year before, when I gave a talk at CrowdStrike's Falcon event. That was kind of the spirit of my talk, and that like we live in an ecosystem like a coral reef or like in a pond, and there's like millions of interdependencies on every single organism. And if you were to like put that in some kind of visual graph of how things depend on each other, it's incredibly overwhelming. And all it takes is like one small bit of algae in a pond to get some kind of disease. And then that has all those knock-on effects that could eventually wipe out the whole pond, right? For example. And we've seen this in nature. And, when we bring it into this world of this, it goes to another level. So on my point of everyone and everything has vulnerabilities, great. You'll scan something and you're going to see a lot more data of vulnerabilities than you did before. The name of the game is still going to be the same as in terms of how, prioritizing it, what's critical, what should be high, and so on and so forth. That being said, though, we know that attackers don't necessarily always go for the high critical vulnerabilities. Why? Because they know that companies will patch them. They want to find those like lower tier ones that your immune system doesn't really bother with. And that's how those problems happen, right? When your immune system just like knows there's an issue there, but just leaves it alone. So that's kind of the slippery slope that we find ourselves on here, is that folks I've talked to are like, do I disclose all these things? Do I not disclose all these things? Where do I go? And I think, Simon, and I'll just say this and I'll want to get the dialogue going with you. But to me, it's like I've been in this space for a long time. And when I reflect on my days when I was in the endpoint market, I remember, I think it was McAfee. I'm pretty sure it was McAfee. There were like worms were a problem, right? And worms will get on your machine and they'll look for an open port and then they'll worm to deploy their payload, do whatever they need to do, then move to the next machine, or depending on how their logic is. McAfee kind of said, hey, we need these personal firewalls to sit alongside our antivirus engine so that if we see worm activity, we can stop it. So maybe it's still deployed its payload because maybe it's 0 day and we weren't able to actually like catch the damage it's going to do on the machine or that device, but we could prevent this anomalous thing from spreading. So we have, not just the antivirus engine to like detect and stop it, but we also have now this personal firewall to contain it. And to me, when I reflect back, Simon, like that was like the beginning point of this notion of detection and response, which we've been in for a while. And I remember, even when I was at Gartner, we all said there's no such thing as perfect protection, so on and so forth. But I guess what I'm saying is back then, everyone strived to like really catch everything and mitigate that risk as much as you possibly can. The notion of detection and response, a good one, we need to continue that. But what I think Mythos shows is like our model of how we do detection and response is going to have to change. We're going to have to use AI to help. We're also going to have to like recognize we can't hire 1 billion humans to do all this. So we're going to have to leverage AI where we can and come up with other models. And I think the industry is going to have to come back to, protection and get ahead of it as much as possible. Is it looking at intent? Is it looking at these types of things? I think it's going to be very, very interesting. Zero trust. I think we've said this on the podcast before. Without a doubt, we have to not just say it. We actually have to live and breathe it. And I think identity is absolute solid part of that. We have to know who and what is doing something. What is it doing? Should it be trusted? Don't trust it. Verify every single transaction, every single device, every single entity. And I haven't even gotten on to the agent stuff yet. That's just on the human side. So honestly, I think identity is the new control plane, wrapped in a zero trust kind of bubble, if you will. And we've got to get back to protection because detection and response is going to need an overhaul. I'll stop there.
Yeah, look, I agree. I definitely agree. I think there's so many, so much history, I guess, we need to deal with as well. I think it's all very well and good to have some sort of new torch, if you like, that can shed light on whatever existing vulnerabilities. But we have to really acknowledge the fact that we have people, have process, legacy tech, rollout, patching, risk, how we measure things, sort of risk measurement and things. CVE scoring, CVE, like all of that stuff, like that needs to change as well. Now, I was just thinking as you were speaking there, really, and sort of jotting down around, does this in some respects, I guess, does it amplify things like vibe coding in the sense of not just vibe coding for what it is, but just the lack of attention on rollout, because it then goes back to the issue of, well, it doesn't matter because we can just throw it back to a whatever automated pen test, for want of a better word, a vulnerability scanner that's going to just go and find all this stuff anyway. So you end up almost, we always talk a lot about left shifting security. You want to get security embedded as far into the CI/CD pipeline as possible, whether it's identity related, credentials, secrets, permission management, principal least privilege, all this sort of stuff. It's like you want to do that as early as you can. Threat model your stuff, look at the attack paths, work out what your threat model is, put countermeasures, and do that iteratively as you build and develop things. Now, do we get to a position, if this sort of vulnerability checking situation, I'm not going to say vulnerability management, I think there's more to it than just finding vulnerabilities, but does that, if we can do this at speed with these automated or semi-autonomous processes, do we just basically chuck out all sorts of crap in integrations, APIs, just go, well, there we go, we can chuck it over to our Mythos powered whatever vulnerability scanner, and that's acting as your catch-all, which gets us back to what you were saying, back to 20 years ago, where you sort of don't do security up front because it's faster to ship without, but then you just rely on a pen test once a year who catches all this stuff, and you pay 150 grand to fix whatever. I don't think we will. I think we're going to be a lot smarter about it this time round. But I do worry that, as you say, if you just scan this at anything, you're going to find a load of problems. Any sort, the most highly patched secure system, it will find something because it's incentivized and optimized to find something, anything. Now, maybe that vulnerability isn't easily exploitable and it requires a set of chained events under a set of really extreme circumstances and whatever. But you still need to then triage that, prioritize that, understand what countermeasures to put in place. Should you respond? Should you redesign stuff or whatever? So it's a little bit, like getting like a human X-ray or some sort of human health check, and suddenly find you've got all these ailments and problems, and it's like, well, I feel all right actually. So do I get every single deficiency fixed, or I just think right now there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of froth, but I for it to be really embedded, we need to look at everything. How we're going to respond, how we're going to remediate. If we do respond and remediate effectively, what does that really look like 2-3 years from now, where you sort of like with vibe coding, that becomes default, but we also then at the other end you have vibe checking, if you like, so you have this sort of this counterpoint, and I'm not quite sure where it ends really. I'm not quite sure what the equilibrium looks like currently.
I mean, I think number one, first and foremost, and I've said it on this podcast before, probably maybe about a year ago, but I've just said like the CISO role, because I'm just putting it back up to the CISO, is not well designed. Like it was designed at another time with people who, I'm sorry, but I'm not. They don't fully understand, what they were doing at the time, outside of the role. And the world has changed so much up to this point that the CISO role in how it's defined is obsolete and incompatible with where we're going. Case in point, like the SEC disclosure stuff, like really? Like really? Unless your company is designing every little chip and bit and byte on anything in your entire network, and oh, by the way, you also rely on other like tons of third parties, like how are you ever going to have a successful CISO when your KPIs for that CISO are just completely silly, right? So these boards that are designing it, I'm just going to call them out. They don't really know what they're doing. They don't. If they did, they wouldn't have those rules. Mythos is going to break that. Mythos is absolutely going to come in and be like, this whole notion of having to disclose all this stuff. We do need disclosure. I'm not saying we don't, but I'm saying the liability on the CISO themselves is just silly. It's just silly. And we're not going to get anywhere with that. So someone or groups need to fix it. Mythos is going to be a forcing factor for that. I think just to reflect on what you said, because I was just taking some notes. The point, Simon, I think of vibe coding, we're past that point. Like what I mean there is like, I think people see vibe coding is not perfect. I've done it myself and it can be very stressful because things just like get out of control very fast. Yeah. And it's hard to put the toothpaste back in the bottle once you've done that. Organizations see the value of vibe coding and they know it can really shrink their time to value, time to market, so on and so forth. So we got that, right? People are going to be vibe coding left, right, and the center. That's going to force, your vibe, sec DevOps, if you want to call it that, right? What you're kind of leading to, right? Get something like Mythos, like as you're getting it out, it's going to check everything. It's going to find tons of vulnerabilities, have these agents or whatever help you patch those and prioritize what. To your human example, it's like, again, there's certain things you should go and get fixed and dealt with and treated. There's other things like, oh, well, Simon, your knee is like making this cracking noise when you walk. You could get surgery on it, but, it's just going to do it again or whatever. But like, if you were to take that full health report, you might, and you try to rectify absolutely everything, it's just not feasible. Same thing. So you got to figure out like, will that knee become an exploit that as, you go to do something, will an attacker go for my knee? 100% they will. Mm-hmm. So we have to come to a point where we know we're never going to fix everything. We know we're always going to find issues. So what do we do? So what I was thinking as you were talking was just like, we have to make things much more resilient. So that's number one. We have to enter this world expecting that, again, going on your knee analogy, someone's going to attack your knee, right? And so, we have to figure out a way to like, maybe we make things like, again, it goes back to zero trust. Like maybe we make things like disposable and consumable, like, going back to the notion of a machine that I go on and it's ephemeral. Like I turn it on, I authenticate, I do what I need to do. It knows my intent. It knows my behavior. It knows what I'm doing. See something off, I have to do something more to authenticate, do other things, right? Going back to identity and zero trust. And then once I'm done that session, like completely kill off the device, because if I'm not in an authenticated state, it doesn't need to be active in doing anything, right? That's again, just on the human side. So to me, I think it's gonna come back to these principles of like making it just far more resilient. Like really, I think the industry really needs to spend some time in like really defining resilience. Mm-hmm. From like a software development perspective to like how these services are run. And you and I have talked about resilience so much with services going out. But the consumable thing, it's like, I think once a board and an organization understands that you are going to get breached, we are going to have vulnerabilities, and we are going to get attacked. Once you accept that, then you build and adapt the organism, which is your organization, around that, your process and your people, and of course your technology. Nothing there is going to be perfect. There's going to be vulnerabilities in your process too, and there's going to be vulnerabilities in your people. And guess what? Mm-hmm. AI tools can find all of them. They can find vulnerabilities with your people. They'll find passwords. They'll find ways to exploit them. They'll find vulnerabilities in your process, right? You can get an agent to look at, how does this organization approve XYZ, right? All right, all I need to do is inject myself here and make an approval for this, and bang, I've stolen whatever, data, money, you name it. And then the technology, which we've already talked about. But this is, I mean, look, this is fascinating, and where this can go. I don't know. I don't want to be as big and bold, but it feels like it's like this inflection point where I think all of those things we mentioned, from, identity to zero trust to all the aspects of cybersecurity, I think are, starting to change. And cybersecurity's kind of had this nice growth, and it's going to continue. But this is, to me, is going to change it at all levels, from how the tech providers are delivering, how consultants are delivering, and then also how the practitioners in an organization are doing their jobs. Like, this has the most broad implications, I think, that I've seen of anything.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on. I think it's look, I think right now, whatever, for the rest of this year, at least 6-8 months, probably longer, really, there's going to be this to and fro. It's going to really alter and change vulnerability analysis, the patching, the remediation. There's going to be lots of response. I think that's,
sure,
that started probably 18, 20, 30 months anyway, with the sort of onset of some of these sort of generative LLMs, where people were using generative to create things and build things. That had huge knock on for all sorts of sort of content generation industries and sub-industries, and suddenly it was, all right, well, I can use a generative situation to create something internally for me. So I think there was that, I guess, is it's like tsunami after tsunami of disruption, if you like. And we do have to sort of constantly think about process, tech, and change, and measurements, and everything else. I think this is just another part of that, without sort of making it too flippant. But you mentioned something there about resiliency, which I think is, we talk about this, or we have talked about this in the past. And again, there's a lot of initiatives out there around, trying to, what is resiliency? I think we've done some surveys on that in the past, actually, from memory. Look, what is it? How do you respond? How do you recover? Where do you recover to? Because you don't really want to go back to the issue or the world before whatever attacks happen. You want to sort of go back to a world which is immune to future attacks. So there's lots of subtleties in resilience. I think it's definitely, I think it's a real gap, actually, in both the technology marketplace and the sort of top level view of the world. I think there's a 100%. Massive difference between sort of CEO resiliency and CISO response recovery. You talk about this, I think we've talked about this quite recently as well, around if you ask the CEO does resilience mean to the business, they're going to come out with stuff like, currency fluctuations, SEC stuff, compliance, competitive pressures, geopolitics, real meta things which could impact the existential life of that business. Maybe you make shoes, and there's a maybe not shoes, but example, maybe you make something with semiconductors or something, and that supply chain is very fragile and brittle. Like that is a resilience issue around maybe container ships aren't going to get to your whatever processing plant for 6 weeks. So there's a big spike, there's a big change, blah blah. So that's resilience, and it's a business resilience thing. I think back to your point there around we need to be better at it. We absolutely do, and I think we need to sort of pull out what the business objectives are and map that into our cyber and identity landscape and say, right, okay, well, we make whatever high-end cameras, we need these chips, this is how we build it, this is how we ship it to market. Brilliant. How does cybersecurity and identity help or hinder those big business objectives? And then you can start looking at the strategies and the tactics, and then eventually you get into, I don't know, one-click onboarding for B2C, or delegated administration for supply chain B2B portals, or whatever it is. But you can very quickly find that lineage to where's a breaking point in that resilience chain which stops this camera being built or a microchip being embedded in it. Do you know what I mean? So you start to see out the bigger picture. And I think if you start to think like that, tools like Mythos can be brilliant, because you can sort of point them at certain parts of that dependency chain, and then you can be quite specific about things. Not like, we've got vulnerabilities everywhere, we don't quite know where to start. But back to your analogy there, if you're a runner, your knee is pretty important. Whereas if you sit and do podcasts, maybe your knee isn't. So you know what I mean. So like there's different levels of risk there. So, but I think it's about the resilience and understanding the business objectives, the team level objectives, departmental objectives. Where does identity and security fit in? Where do those vulnerabilities, if they were exploited, what does that look like? What does the impact look like there? I think that to me that's got to be a strategic sort of position to take.
I think, Simon, those are all really just a contrast of the CEO to the CISO and what that looks. And I think you know, I don't want to get into politics or whatever. I'm just going to mention really quickly. It's like we've learned through what happened with COVID and what's going on right now, like how fragile a lot of these systems actually are from a business perspective. And then when we move that into a digital perspective, it's like, really? Okay. CrowdStrike, from like, you know, the NHS outage, from like these ransomware outages, from, you know, like we can go on and on and on about all these outages that have happened, right? Like it's just like there's breaches and then there's like these outages. So it's like if a business has done a really good job in ensuring that, like, you know, hey, we've got redundant supply chain, we've got like backup generators, we've got this, we've got that, we've got this in the physical world to make your shoes or make your pens or make whatever product it is, right? And they've planned that out. Like, cool. Have you also done that in the digital economy, right? Because now, if you are a fashion designer, many big brands have their own websites now, and they also have their own digital means to manage all their suppliers. So there's, you know, APIs, there's all that kind of stuff going on now. And so if a data center loses power in your region for AWS or GCP or whomever, you know, maybe in the shared responsibility model, they said they would take care of that redundancy, but at the same time, do you also want to like depend on that entirely? Now your business is completely shot, at least for that moment in time while you're waiting. So it's like, look, I think about SBOM and supply chain and this, that, and the other. I think we've got all of the bits and pieces, the puzzle pieces, I think, on the table, Simon. And I think we do have people in the room that understand we need to put these together. But I think it goes back to one of your earlier points. It's like when you bring the human element in and you bring in like the politics of, not geopolitics, but the politics of business and all of these things, and it gets very complicated. That's when it's hard for a business to execute on these things. Because look, I think, you know, I was saying some harsh things before, but I won't take it back, but I'll just, you know, ease up a bit and just say, look, I understand at the end of the day, a business is trying to be like, okay, we're trying to meet our numbers and meet these objectives for shareholders or whatever, right? Whatever their goals are. And I think that, I think everyone has this idea that they need to do these things, but perhaps there's not a major economic force to make them do it right now. Going back to what I said, it feels like Mythos is a very interesting development in the market, where if we actually take advantage of this very disruptive development, I think the first thing we should come to is resilience, and we should question, like you said, CEO, CFO, CISO, every leader in the business should say, let's sit down and define what resilience means and where the overlap is. And Simon, I would actually go above what you said, because you said cyber and identity. And I would say, let's just cast that aside for a second. Let's talk about what is the outcome the business actually wants. Is it selling more planes? Is it doing this? Is it doing this? Starting from there, then we say, right, hold on. The way how we sell everything today is through our mobile app, let's just say. Well, geez, maybe we should make sure that that mobile app is always on. So going back to the knee analogy, it's like, oh, that we're a football player, soccer, and our knees are absolutely critical, aka the mobile app is critical for our business because 90% of our business comes from the mobile app. Let's make for dang sure that that thing is like super bulletproof, and we've got some kind of redundancy plan that if somehow there's some insane vulnerability, we can roll it back to a previous version where we know it was good, and we could go from there. And we've got that all mapped out. That is, I think, what needs to happen, along then with what you said with, you know, the cyber identity, zero trust. that has to come next. Agents are gonna. We haven't even gotten onto that, but as we roll agents and agentic stuff into that equation, that completely changes all of that too. It just hyper accelerates everything you and I just said.
Yeah, it does. I don't disagree at all. I think we're in such a period of massive transformation, and I think we often sort of complain about maybe certain things don't move fast enough. Legacy tech and this and that. I think at the minute we're actually moving a little bit too fast around things, and it's like, let's do vulnerabilities, let's do agents, let's do whatever. And it's like back to the sort of workflow objectives, business process thing. Like all of that has to catch up for it to be effective and useful. All analogies around AI is giving your toddler keys to the Ferrari and all this sort of thing. It's a little bit like that because if you're a tiny organization, in some respects, you thought, well, we can move fast, we can break things, we can absorb all this tech, but you can't really because you're small and you can only do so many things because you have finite resource. And you go, oh, well, the biggest banks in the world or whatever, defense organizations or whatever, well, they can't move massively fast because they've got too much technology and all of their sort of 150 years behind them of experience, of customers, of competitors, acquisitions, blah, blah. So you can't move at the speed of AI just yet. I think what would be interesting is doing this in 10 years' time or 15 years' time where all of the technical capabilities ultimately become commodity and they get flushed down through, as you say, the sort of business objectives sort of stack.
Yep.
A lot of stuff just disappears. Things become obsolete, passwords and logging in and all this sort of crap. But it's all AI led, and you think, well, what does that world look like? And to me, I just can't get away from it's just going to be AI talking to AI because there's what other vehicles are you going to have in the equation? If you have a vulnerability scanner based on AI, well, you're going to have a response remediation built on AI. If you're going to have vibe coding built on AI, you're going to need some integration component that can work just as fast, which is going to be AI. So I know you've touched a few times in the past around the browser sort of issue there as well, and the agents.
Yeah.
Let's segue quickly. We did a paper about 2 weeks ago. Let me share this one again. Looking at some of the bite size aspects of Agentic, because I think again the Agentic world is suddenly this huge, big, massive set of capabilities, tools. You can do all these different use cases, and it's like, we need to secure Agentic. Well, okay, what does that mean? You've got governance problems, you have authentication, authorization, permissioning, ephemerality, credential. You've got all of these real big, broad set of problems. And we kicked a few vendors, I guess, after RSA on this because they weren't specific enough around, okay, how are you securing AI? How are you securing Agentic? And we did a cheat sheet a few weeks back looking at a very specific use case, which is a really important one.
By the way, to our audience, this is really good stuff. So no, keep going, Simon. This is really good.
I think it's all right as well. But it's just trying to enable, it's trying to get the conversation going. And we do quite a few of these free open source cheat sheets, and typically to introduce a concept and topic, analyze what vendors are talking about, pull out the requirements, pull out some of the use cases and some of the sort of ways of thinking about this. And the classic one is the ownership of agents. And it's like, well, okay, how would you go about doing that? And it's like, well, let's just take a step back. Why do we need to think about ownership for Agentic? And really, this boils back down to the life cycle problem, which we have in the human world. So you talk about B2E and B2C, there's life cycles there. All that join, move, and leave a crap that we haven't really fixed. And you think, well, okay, if we apply that to the Agentic world, what does that look like? Because if we treat Agentic within the B2E world, we really could if we should tie that to other employees. So if Simon, as the member of staff, goes and spins up a load of agents, we need to know about that. And if I suddenly leave the organization, what happens to my agents? Because those agents could be really, really important. They could be the stick that's keeping up this whole massive building afloat, or they could be total garbage. They could be logic bombs, and they could be sending data to competitors and all sorts. So we need to link them to humans. And okay, well, how do we do this? And again, this will evolve massively again as we develop here. But you could be looking at activity logs and saying, well, okay, what's the agent accessing? What's it actually doing? And can that be tied into a team, an existing business process? Maybe you can link it to my human related identity provider stuff. So maybe my access tokens and ID tokens or SAML assertions that were associated to the app or the cloud portal or the SaaS that then invokes an agent. So there's different ways of sort of handling this, but essentially we're looking at some point to have some sort of sponsor or some sort of person involved in this agentic world. And if an agent gets created, it was Simon or Simon's team or a particular area in the business. And if that changes, the human stuff changes, maybe the agentic stuff changes too. And it's just trying to say, look, you know what? It's all cool, but we need to somehow link it. And what does that look like? So I think agents are here to stay. They're going to have a huge impact on B2E and B2C. But let's get the basics done first, I think.
I mean, look, and I think I while I agree with you there when you mentioned basics, it's like we have to get to kind of some minimum viable, acceptable kind of place where we are, because I think the market's moving so quickly that if we were always to like aim for perfection, we'll never get there, right? So we have to like get to a good spot where like, hey, this is acceptable for what we're doing with the human side. And then we need to kind of like make sure we're doing that. And I think you can kind of do it in parallel. But just as you were talking too, what I kept thinking, this is all like analogies, but it's like airplanes, right? We know that pilots it's autopilot for everything, but the pilots do a few things, right? Like their number one goal is safety. And then under safety, it's then, fuel economy, and then, getting you to your destination, right? So if they're going to take a longer path, right, and burn more fuel, they'll do that if it's going to make it a safer flight for everybody, right? But if they can get win-win, where it's like a safer path plus, we'll pick up the jet stream, so like we don't have to burn as much, like that's amazing, right? Like that's what they try to go for. And they input it all, and the autopilot helps them as a co-pilot, like quite literally, right? Pun intended. So I think we are going to enter a world where, look, at the end of the day, when you said AI, talking to AI, yeah, that's going to happen. We already have like basic machine to machine stuff, right? This takes it to a whole other level. But there's got to be a human in the loop. If we don't understand what these systems are doing, then shame on us. Problems are absolutely going to happen. I mean, the whole goal of, I'm going to get philosophical here, but bear with me for like 20 seconds. The whole goal of science is so that we can study the universe, the human body, the cell, right? The atom, and understand, everything about it, understand everything around it, so we can model things. And if we poke it, it's going to do this. And based on that, I can create a laser, an LED, a computer, right? That's what's led us to this point. If we remove ourselves and let AI just completely write code that we don't know anything about, we're guaranteed going to have a problem. So I think just when I map, Simon, to what you have with like humans and then, kind of agents or machines and NHI, I think that humans should always be in the loop across B2E, B2C, right? Just across the board. When I took some Waymos at RSA, because I just wanted to experience it, it was kind of cool, creepy, cool. Very good drivers, I have to say. If you haven't done it, definitely worth a shot.
No conversation though.
No conversation. You're able to like play your own music. But there was no dramatic acceleration. It was very smooth. And when I saw some like cyclists and I was actually impressed in the number of different scenarios it was presented with. Anyway, that aside though, I didn't experience it, but I had a friend that told me, like if you do certain things, they are watching. There's like human behind the scenes that can take over and remotely, right? But a human is still there. So again, going back to those pilots are there. They have their goals. They input their goals. They tell the system what they want, and they sit there and monitor it. And at any time, they can take over. That is what I think we need to frame ourselves with as we enter this world where Simon's agent, to your point, right? Like you lead the organization, you don't want an orphaned agent. There should, say if it's that agent is a privileged user, you and me are DB admins. Okay, we build our own agent. It's a shared agent for Simon and David. Simon moves or leaves. David's still, the main person, and I'm onboarding someone new. I still have control of that, right? I still have the rights to be able to change that agent and get it to do certain things. Again, same thing. I have a plane. Let's say it's an Embraer, because you mentioned Embraer. I got an Embraer. Well, they, Air Canada or United or Singapore or BA, they switch out pilots all the time, right? Mm-hmm. So they go on, they authenticate to it. The plane should authenticate to them in theory, and then they can control it and input what they need to input. And if it does something weird, they can take over, right? That I think has to be, going back to what we said previously, a part of like the AI resilient business infrastructure we need that's modern. And I think we have an idea now of what's needed, but there's still more to come on how we need to adapt to this world. But it's crazy. I feel like just in this conversation, like between you and me, we could write like 5 books on like all these topics,
Yeah, well, they're probably out of date by the time they come to. I think you made an interesting point there about the AI. I just wanted to talk one last final comment. I'm reading a book at the minute called Chip War. Yeah. Chip War by Chris Miller. It's the history of the microchip and how microchip sort of developed and the technical side, but the proliferation into consumer goods in the 70s and 80s, whatever else. Anyway, it's a fascinating book. But it's a really interesting angle in there about the theft of IP of microchip technology, which still happens to this day. Any real intellectual property, whether it's microchip related or AI related or whatever, there's still a huge market for intellectual property theft, and it's proliferates and there's a huge amount of cybersecurity spent. Anyway, the reason I bring this up is you made an interesting point about having the human in the loop of the AI stuff, because if not, and the AI goes off and sort of has its own roadmap, develops its own optimization plan without the human involved, that's quite a dangerous place. And the reason why I sort of want to make this sort of comparison to this chip wars thing, all of the nation states, and you can read the book to figure out who they may be, who went through the process in the sort of 60s, 70s, and 80s of stealing intellectual property around microchips, actually what they did was they destroyed their own innovation capabilities because they didn't know how to innovate and develop and research and, as you say, use science to research problems, find solutions, and develop their own roadmap and vision for how technology should be. They just stole the stuff. So on one hand, it's like you get a quick advantage because you've stolen stuff and copied it, but actually you become massively dependent on the entity you've stolen it from. And I see the parallels here around if you let your AI ecosystem or the agentic ecosystem become so detached, as you say, from the human and internally the business process and all the rest of that stuff, it's a very, very shady world because it's not really tied into the sort of true source of the innovation or the true source, the business objective and the needs and what we're using the technology for. It's sort of going off in its own technology for technology's sake. Anyway, so it's some interesting parallels there.
That's fascinating. I mean, it's. I mean, we could go into 1,000 analogies, but it's like, a machine starts lifting things for you, and you're not lifting anymore. Your muscles are going to vanish, right? And you're like it's these kinds of, and maybe that's okay, right, for that particular scenario, but you lose that ability. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about, knowledge, right? And going to the moon, and said, like, after we did that literal moonshot, or that was in like the 60s, he's like, and then kind of, they didn't keep that program going. All of that knowledge base was lost. Right. So like, that's the thing. And I always, I always hated, I did electrical engineering, and I was much more comfortable, and you can laugh at me all you want, but whatever. I was much more comfortable with like non-object oriented programming. And fine, maybe you can say, well, David, you're not going to be very efficient. No, but at the same time, I just always liked understanding on the assembly language line. Like, I knew my code was optimal. I knew what it was doing. I knew how much memory at any given moment it was using. As soon as I started learning Java and like using these objects, which I had no
skills,
idea how they were written.
For sure.
You know, like it's insane. And we see this now. I had a call with CTO this morning and we were just talking about, you know, infrastructure as code and how complex these environments are between like all these different clouds and all the different stacks and everything, not, you know, just like orchestration being very difficult. And it's like, wow, like just the good old days of it being very simple, you know, we can understand it. And as we go into this new world, as you mentioned, if we lean too hard on the vibe coding, we're going to lose the ability to truly like read code and understand what a system is doing. And I don't think that's a good thing. Like, it's not, we have to find a balance, you know, of how we can leverage this stuff while at the same time still being involved in it and still understanding what it does and having the control to like turn it off when it's running, you know, doing things that it shouldn't be doing.
I think that's absolutely fine. It's a really good place to be.
It's a big one.
Constantly being controlled. It's got a bit deep there, but yeah, I think we do have to be in control. I think we have to measure success. We have to be, as always, tie technology to what is it trying to achieve. You know, what's the objective for this? Either me as a person, or a team, or the business, or the bigger meta, or maybe as a consumer, perhaps. But we need to keep that in mind and link it effectively to whatever technology we choose. And I think it's there's some really, really exciting innovations happening, and I'm sure in the next 6, 8, 9, 10 weeks things will change again, which is, you know, really exciting stuff. But we must always measure value, keep the human in the loop for the time being until we get too old and tired. Perhaps we can delegate off. Who knows? But Dave, thank you for sitting down and chatting. We've covered so many different topics there, and I think there's so much exciting things happening in identity and cyber and agentic that certainly keeps us busy. So thank you for taking some time out and sharing some insights there. Thank you to our audience for listening wherever you are in the world. This has been episode 72 of the Analyst Brief podcast. Thanks to Dave, thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.